Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start in about 2-3 minutes. So I'd love it if you could take your seats and get your brains in order, ready for this next session. This is the session about, I'm looking at the IT guys, my theme has disappeared. Technical support, you've lost my screen. Is he good? Okay. Yeah, he can come up with Mishi. I've lost my screen, guys. Uh-huh. Okay. So can we put the slide on then, please? George is here. Mishi's here. Yep. Yeah. That looks like the correct title. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm trying to make this move. Good. Okay. Hope you're all comfortable. My name is Peter Ballantyne. I'm the facilitator of today's session. And we're going to have a nice conversation, and things are moving far too quickly here, about the role of social protection and adaptive safety nets. Before we start, I know everybody in Kenya has a mobile phone. Everybody who's visiting has a phone. I'd like you just to take a minute to think about social protection, adaptive safety nets. You can point your phone at the QR code. You can also go to the link and enter a code. I want you to take a little survey, just a little survey to think about why we're here, what your expectations are. This is just a warming up while our speakers get organized and we start to think about what we're doing in the next hour or so. Is everybody finding their way? I'm not seeing many people on the phones. Everybody should have a phone, nearly, and you should be clicking in something nice for me. So, warming up. I'm trying to make this machine work. There we go. What are we going to be doing in the next hour? We're at the phase here. We're doing some welcomes. We're talking about the agenda. We have a short framing. A couple of colleagues are going to kind of frame the conversation. We're talking about social protection, adaptive safety nets, and climate change, climate adaptation. We have a couple of case studies. We then have a panel interaction, and we will do a small synthesis at the end. Now, let me just check to see whether anybody has managed to vote. Did anybody manage to vote in the room? Yeah, I can see a few nods. So why don't we move on there and just have a quick look? And I'm going to try to, can you click on this for me? It's, they should open the web page here. This is the results. So let's see what the question was and what your replies were. And then we're going to get into the substance. This is just warming you up because we've had a whole week of conversations. We've been talking and listening, and I wanted you to click a little bit. So the gentleman at the back is busy smiling, but I don't know whether this is working. Can you put, yeah, there we go, the result. Can you make full screen, please? Okay, what's the question? Yeah, we know. Can you hover, can you put can you put the cursor over there? We know what social protection is needed to adapt. So not many people. I've only got about 15 people only out of the whole room. I'm far away from the microphone. Only 15 or so of you have signed up. So if you want to think about that, it looks like we know what we're doing. That's good. So we're hoping that means that today we'll be zooming in on solutions. We're not going to be wondering what the challenges are because we know what we're doing. A few of us are not sure. Well, not too bad. Okay, if you can put the slides back, please, at the back. Let's get into the substance. Can I ask my speakers, George and Mishi, could you maybe come up here? You're going to be the first of this. Great. So, Indeed, you should put that slide up. We have a pleasure today of having two eminent people to kickstart the conversations. Mishi is here. Oh, why do you keep moving my slide for me? And George is here. So we're going to start with Mishi, and there we go. There we go. There she is. And she's going to frame the conversation. She's a Senior Global Policy Lead, Women's Environment and Development Organization, and she is here representing, I think, the Women and Gender Constituency who are co-organizing this meeting. So Mishi, I understand you have no slides. You're going to give us a fabulous setting of the scene. You're going to take around 10 minutes. And then after that, we're going to hear from George, who comes from the climate change space. Okay, over to you. I'm going to stop if you can just, away you go.
Thank you so much. I'm sure I can speak from here. Good afternoon, everyone. Really wish to acknowledge my co-organizers for putting this event together. And we also appreciate all of you who have joined us today. As I've been introduced, my name is Mwan Hamisi. I work as Global Police Lead. And I'm here just to get the conversation going. When I was asked if I have a presentation, I said no, because I'm not a fan of power and points. I'd rather talk. Because if anything, you want to alter the relations of power and you want to we want to make sure that power goes to women. So I will start by really quoting the rapporteur for extreme poverty and human rights, Mr. Philip Aston, when he said, even if the current climate targets are met, still, tens of millions of people will be impoverished, leading to the widespread displacement, hunger, and poverty. That's the reality. We are in the state now where the harm has already been caused. So even if we do everything possible moving forward, still we will have millions of people who will be trapped in the poverty cycle. And hence, the need to look and invest and interrogate in any tools possible to address this vulnerability, and social protection is one of those tools. But allow me to start from the beginning. And I forgot to introduce myself as a feminist. I pledge my allegiance to African feminism, and hence I use my feminism as a lens through which I view the world. And I hope that doesn't make you uncomfortable. From the feminist perspective, especially from African feminist perspective, we do understand that climate crisis, as it is now, is already causing massive impact in our community. But those impacts are just added on because the inherited political colonial legacies, economic model that we are using, but also the patriarchy structures has really placed women in a state of vulnerability. So climate change is just exhibiting those vulnerability which are already existing. And hence, addressing climate change, in this case, addressing vulnerability, you need to work from an intersectional point of view to look at how do you address those intersecting injustices and oppression. And I must say, as much we are having this conversation today on the social protection, for us, we truly believe that there ought to be a deliberate and intentional efforts to end these injustices. So we envision the world where we will not be in need to save people from poverty or to give sort of like support for them to stay alive. We need to envision the world where everyone can live a dignified life of choices and fulfillment. So for the meantime, social protection become the tool, but it's the tool that in future that needs to be resolute. We believe as well, I think in this context, that social protection can and has a potential for addressing some of the practical issues. One, for example, an equal access of resources, especially in the community. We know in our community, women can easily sell their land just because they need the next food. They need the next meal. And they can sell their land, they can sell their lessons. I'm coming from the coast, so they can sell their clothes, they can sell. So that property rights, the right to own property, can easily go away just because of one meal or just because of one disaster. And second, social protection has an opportunity to address the care burden. Most of the women, especially, and the communities are carrying a huge burden of unpaid care. And then again, social protection have opportunity to address violence and insecurities. I have seen sisters, I had been fortunate to travel and connect with communities who are dealing with the impact of climate crisis. And most of them, they might be forced to, especially girls, they might be forced to travel at night to the safe haven. But in the way from their homes where the floods is to the safe haven is an unsafe journey. And anything can happen between the shelter and the flooding home. And last, social protection can and should address the limited participation. We know now in any community that you go, women can easily, if they have to choose between going to a community meeting or going to sell their next fruit so that they can get income, they will choose to go to sell their produce, not to attend to the community meeting. And hence, having a system that addresses that is imperative. And in terms of the principle now, as we are looking at social protection as a tool to address climate impact, can we make sure that the social protection program and policy, one, are inclusive? And by inclusive, like really center the need of every group in the community. The needs of women are different from the need of people with a disability. They are different with the need of people living in urban poverty area. They are different from the needs of small-scale farmers or the vendors. So we need to have social protection which has been tailored to fit the economic need. But as I said, it also needs to be a tool through which economic independence can be attained, and this needs to be gender responsive, and importantly, it needs to be echoed within the legal framework. Unfortunately, especially within the content, most of the social protection program have been done as a charity. Yeah, have been done outside the framework, and we don't have a strong legal and policy framework to make sure that we attain the universal social protection, and more importantly, we have investment in social protection. And last but not least, I think a comprehensive social protection needs to address the component of awareness, especially to the communities, but also to the decision maker, and making it a right and not a charity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mishi. One thing you said, a certain moment, you said, for the meantime. So we don't see this as a permanent tool, a permanent intervention, as I understand. So even with climate change, we're still thinking that this is something which we hope would not be necessary in the long term, right?
Correctly, because we do know we have to be categorical that to address climate change, we need to cut our emission. We need to put investment. We need to change the way our economic model. And also to address poverty, we need to take everyone out of poverty. So as we are designing social protection and promoting it and creating policy, this is the tool for the meantime, right? This is the tool to make sure that we have a framework that addresses the current need as we fight for the bigger good, or for the bigger fight. And that is, the bigger fight is to live in the world free from climate crisis, the world free from poverty, the world free from hunger, the world free from injustices, economic, political, and social injustices.
Okay, that's a huge, ambitious agenda, which I think many people in the room will share. It may take a little while, so we will need the social protection. Let me move on to George. George was originally a panelist with us. However, he is in high demand across the whole week. So he told us he could come a little earlier. And so, George, you haven't had time to prepare something. So you heard Mishi and setting out a little bit the framing, the agenda. I mean, you're kind of operating at a kind of the negotiations level, in a sense, for Africa, for the group of 77. It's 177 maybe. It's a large group. So where did you see these types of questions, issues, challenges coming into your agenda? I mean, how do you, social protection, it's really these freedoms that Mishi talked about. Is this something that you can bring in? How do you see that?
Yeah, thanks, moderator and my sister. I always listen to everything, even those things I don't like. But we've been together for a long time, and I must admit that WIDO is an organization that has supported our African group of negotiators. Personally, we had the first meeting in Addis Ababa, where we got Bridget to come, and actually she was there when we formed the Africa Working Group on Gender and Climate Change, and so we listen to each other sometimes. And the WEDO also supports quite a number of colleagues from Africa to negotiate gender. So thanks for that support. Now, I think what we need to do is start from the convention and the Paris Agreement. And if you look at the framing of the Article 2 of the convention, is that whatever we do in stabilizing the climate system, that means whatever we do in adaptation and mitigation, it should contribute towards achieving sustainable development and poverty eradication. That is the underpinning of the convention, but also of the Paris Agreement. And if you start from there, then the next question will be, is the achieving the sustainable development and poverty eradication homogeneous? And the answer is no. You'll find that there are different vulnerabilities within those groupings, and therefore you may require different interventions, some which are very targeted in order to ensure and secure those that are disadvantaged. And I must also just say from here that in the negotiation space, unfortunately, people with disabilities, we have never mentioned them anywhere. And that worries me, as much as we talk about the others, but when we're enumerating, we don't seem to talk about people with disabilities, and especially those with impaired hearing, for example. We talk, but there's no mechanism to reach them out. We never consult them. So what I'm simply saying is we need to kind of unpack the type of society that we live in and make sure that we're able to bring out their needs and interests so that they become part of the both global conversation, but also regional, national, and even subnational level. Secondly, being on the continent, I think the key point here you'll be asking yourself will be, what will be the priority for Africa? And I think we've heard that the main priority is adaptation, but of course, we all agreed as part of the Paris Agreement that we have a collective global response, which means even though we contribute minimal emissions, we should avoid a situation where we are increasing our emissions. And there are predictions actually that if we continue now our business as usual, we may end up by 2050, we will be at 10%. And that already will be a serious need. So we will lose that narrative that Africa only contributes less than 4%. That less than 4% has been there for a very long time. I'm not sure it still is. But that's the bottom line, that we need to update our narrative and disclassify it so that we avoid generalities and emphasize the vulnerabilities. And I think Africa, we have more challenges given the diverse ecosystems that we live in. And it's on that basis that now you look at what are the social safety nets that you can deploy in order to support those that are extremely vulnerable. But the question will be, do we have evidence? Is that evidence there where you have disaggregated data that allows you to do that? And it's on that basis that we're working with the governments of Kenya, and I've seen my colleague here, Botswana and Uganda, and last year we did with Rwanda, to try and do granular gender and climate change vulnerability hotspot mapping that is able to generate that data and decision support tool that will enable governments and other stakeholders and say, if you're looking at Kenya, these counties are more vulnerable and therefore targeted intervention, including social safety and protection efforts are targeted towards that. It helps to do that. And then finally is in respect to this loss and damage fund. Losses and damages, which she kind of talked about, those are residual impacts that even if you did all the adaptation, that it would still be felt. Now, that's where now the social protection comes in, because then those people are already below the recovery, the bouncing back, and therefore they will need something that will help them to bounce back so that they are able to be to undertake their tasks. So there is room, in my view, in that, and as a consequence, that means that if you have not just don't remain in the gender room discussing feminism. Can you be in a room where, for example, loss and damage operationalization is going to be discussed and say, look here, we want social protection to be included for this category of people because they are suffering, because that's where the decision is making. And at a national level, countries are doing their nationally determined contributions. You need to ensure that those safety protection, even if they are not in the other policy instrument, they are included in NDCs, they are included in national adaptation plans, and they are included in the long-term strategies that are being developed, and especially in 2025, so that they become part of the conversation, part of the policy response, and therefore attracting investment to cushion our people. Thank you very much.
Thanks, George. Just quickly, this bouncing back, do we expect the changes that are coming because of the climate changes, that is bouncing back going to be particularly difficult or require different trampolines? How do you see that? I mean, is this posing a quite different challenge to the ones we already have? I mean, can we expect something very different that's going to require something completely different to what we have now?
Yes. If you go into the negotiations, and especially when we are going into the discussions, because one of the things we'll be discussing at COP28 will be, one, the global stocktake. The global stocktake is supposed to help us to understand where we are and what we need to do in order to remain within 1.5. Of course, it's not targeting one country. It's targeting all of us, what we need to do. And one of the policy instruments that can be included in the global stocktake as an approach that can help us to strengthen and cushion those most vulnerable can be the social protection. Second, the loss and damage, as I've indicated, fund is now going to be operationalized. I think the COP28 presidency has emphasized that he would want to see operationalization of the loss and damage fund at COP28. Now, what that means is that we need to unpack, and currently the transition committee is working on what will be the scope of that fund, what can be included, what's not included. The community here and those outside who are interested in this social protection, which would fall squarely in the space of losses and damages, need to have innovative ideas as to how that can be framed in the context of bouncing back in that respect. But if you go with your traditional handouts, and it will be treated as nothing innovative, and therefore you don't. So you need to think, how do you do differently? Otherwise, it will go back to the current humanitarian approach, and that will not be considered appropriate, and countries are going to resist that because they want something that is embedded in and be managed by countries or fits within the policy frameworks of countries.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Mishi. You want to have a super quick reaction? Then we have to move on. Our time is running.
Yes, I just want to echo on the bouncing back and to your question that if the world continues as it is, can we bounce back in the same way with the social protection, for example? We do know, and the IPCC has been clear, that the losses will get to the point where the world cannot be a livable place anymore. We'll have a loss of life, loss of infrastructure, but also we will be in a situation that we are no longer talking about protection. We are going to talk about humanitarian crises, in which is a whole new ball game. We are going to potentially, which is unfortunately, but we are going potentially to start looking at how can we move an entire country from their sovereign state. So it's really important now to address this intersecting vulnerability and using social protection as tool, but more urgently to address the climate crisis itself.
Super. Thank you very much. I think you framed really nicely some big challenges. I think, George, also you kind of posed we have to work differently. We need to be innovating. So thank you very much. We're going to have to move on. George, if you need to run away to your next appointment, you're free. Mishi, we need you to stay because you have no new appointments for the next hour. Let me move on with our agenda. Thank you so much, both of you. Much appreciated. Okay, we're going to move on very quickly. We have 2 case studies for you. Maybe you should both come up, or who's going to go first? Yes, maybe you come up first. 2 case studies for you. We have 2 colleagues here. Majabin, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Yes. She works with UN Women. And Kelvin, he works with the International Livestock Research Institute. Your slides are here. I think you can, if you want to speak from here, you can. If you want to talk from there, that's also fine. The zapper works. I think the first presentation is Majabin. The idea here, why this zapper doesn't, there we go. I bring it to you. 10 minutes or so? Yep. So we're looking for 10 minutes inspiration. If you want to sit, you can stand here too. I'm up to you, completely up to you. Here's nicer, actually.
Yeah, I prefer to stand, although I'm not too tall, but it should be fine. Okay, good. Thank you very much, everyone. So my name is Majabin Alarakia. I am from the Women's Economic Empowerment, I lead the Women's Economic Empowerment work for UN Women in East and Southern Africa. The case study that I'm going to present is actually work that's done in West Africa, because we also have another team that works there and another team that works in North Africa, but this is sort of UN Women's structure. And I'm really glad that we had that framing conversation because it helps me frame a little bit of what I'm going to say now. And we're going to talk about gender-responsive crop insurance for women farmers in Mali. Now, I'm sure the first question is gender-responsive crop insurance, like insurance is insurance, guys. Why is UN Women getting all tied up around gender-responsive insurance? But as I go through this, you'll get a bit more of a sense of why we're talking about this in this way. Okay, so I'm not going to expect you to be able to see this. I'll talk through it. But this is the overall sort of framework that we were looking at. So first, this project was done in partnership with UNCDF, the UN Capital Development Fund, and was funded by Innovation Norway. And here, you know, what we were starting to look at is, yes, we need social protection, but not all social protection has to be state-funded all the time. In insurance particularly, we look at models of contributing schemes where, you know, you pay something on a monthly basis or whatever as a protection. And most of you maybe, well, all of you who have cars must have insurance. So you know how the insurance game sort of works. Now, in this case, we were looking, and I'm trying to link it a little bit to what what was being discussed earlier, and looking at insurance as a way of cushioning for the most vulnerable people as we go through. So here what we did was we looked specifically at women in the agriculture sector, and I mean, all of you know this, we've talked about it a lot over the last 3 or 4 days. That's where the women are, well, in the agriculture sector, a lot of the work is done by women in Africa. And so in this case, the gender perspectives were brought in to look at supporting the first piece that we wanted to look at was supporting a value chain that was a women-dominated value chain. In the agriculture sector. So even within the agriculture sector, there are some value chains that are more women-dominated. So here we were looking at peanuts and in Mali, because women are overrepresented in the peanut value chain. And then we looked at different approaches of what we could do to bring the women and to make it more gender responsive. And a couple of the things, you know, are very basic that I'm sure everybody in this room knows about, but perhaps people in the outside world maybe don't know so much about. One was that we, you know, just the headlines, and I'll go into more detail later, was that we ensured that the training and the publicity and the sort of outreach around this insurance product was done by women. And the second piece that we looked at was to ensure that when this information dissemination was happening, it was also done at a time and a venue that women were able and comfortable to come to. And as, again, just going through the overall sort of highlights, and then I'll go into more detail, as a result of what we did, we had 1,100 new insurance users that were women that had never previously used insurance before. So this demonstrated that we can develop products that women can use, and that despite all the structural sort of, and the rhetoric around women are not interested in insurance, women don't have the decision-making power to invest in insurance, women don't understand insurance systems, women don't have the financial literacy to understand how insurance systems work. All of this, our project shows that all of these are myths, and we can actually, if we were really to implement something with a sufficient gender lens, we would be able to bring women into this sector and develop products that were beneficial to them and that they would use. So, yes.
A little worried on time.
Yeah. I've talked about most of the things I need to say anyway, so now it's kind of going through the steps. So I talked about the challenges, and we said that, you know, women are vulnerable and at risk, and mostly when it comes to droughts and floods and things like this, women tend to be the ones in the agriculture sector who lose a lot of their income. And the disaster insurance products fail to address this usually. And this product was developed, and I should give credit here, to with an insurtech company called OCO, which also functions in West Africa in a few different countries. Oops, sorry, no, too far. Okay, no, too many clicks. Back. Yeah. So as I mentioned, we started with a sort of a needs analysis, talking to women, understanding what their challenges were, understanding quite a bit in terms of how many women signed up for the product. So you see that having the right kind of outreach and the right approach to outreach increases the uptake. Click. There we go. Okay, and I think this one kind of shows the same kind of information, so I'm not going to go into this because we talked about it already, so I'll skip that. I'll skip that one as well. This is just an analysis of the number of people, and we have got all this data for anyone who is interested in learning about all of this. And then, as I said, the project resulted in 1,100 new women smallholder farmers who had crop insurance for the first time in their lives. The private sector company, was also able to reduce its gender gap in terms of its client base. So they increased their client base from 18% women to 25% women. So it also has implications for private sector, reaching out to the female markets. And then there's also areas of scale-up that we're working on going forward. So the key takeaways, okay? Key takeaways. As we said, gender-responsive and innovative social protection mechanisms must be tailored to the needs of the target women, should be context-specific, and leverage on existing opportunities. The second part, it looks also at gender-responsive approaches. As I said, there are ways to do this, and there are demonstrated ways to do this, which are targeting women to bring them more into the insurance products that could be used. And also it makes business sense for the private sector, because it takes the private sector to markets that they haven't been able to access before, while providing a useful service. So it's not that exploitative nature of private sector, but it's more in terms of providing some of the services that are needed and providing some of the social protection. And I think I'm going to stop there because we have a lot more things to talk about. And this was what I was talking, the the takeaways. And that's it, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Reflecting on what we heard in the very beginning. So if extreme changes are coming and disasters and threats, is this system itself resilient enough? Will it deal with the big changes we expect in the future, or is this something for the meantime?
No, this is a system that is sufficiently self-sustaining, that it should be able to be resilient in case of large sort of droughts. And I know Kevin's going to talk a bit more about this in a bit, but essentially it is triggered based on events, and it's based on objective data. So once the meteorological agency says, okay, we were supposed to have 10 milliliters of rain on a particular month, but we had less, so therefore we have a drought, and therefore the insurance system immediately kicks in. So women don't need to actually go and understand how to fill out the forms and all of this. It is an automatic trigger, and the money goes straight through a mobile phone payment system into their account. So it's all quite automated, where it doesn't require action from the women, it doesn't require them to know about the insurance system. They just need to understand that if there's a drought, and if you've been making your payments, you will get a payout as a protection mechanism.
Okay, because we were asked as part of this to identify the good practices, the solutions that work. Pretty confident? A solution that works? A good practice?
Yes, pretty confident.
We can all take this forward?
Take it forward. We've also got a second round of funding for it to scale it up. So I think we've demonstrated that we're getting there, something there.
Super, great, excellent. Kelvin, over to you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Super perfect timing. Kelvin, you should just be able to click along. And the guys at the back, you need to point at the guys at the back. They like to be pointed at. Yep, there we go. You've gone too far.
I'm too quick.
You should be able to go back. There we go.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot. My name is Kelvin Shikuku. I work with the International Livestock Research Institute as a scientist. And I want to come back to what George talked about evidence. So do we have anything we can show already about how things are looking like? And so I'll be talking about how we can foster social inclusion, but also, enhance resilience by integrating insurance within graduation programs. So let me give a little bit of motivation here. So we know that societies construct gender, in many ways or along many dimensions, but three stand out here. Important for insurance is the differences, for example, in expenditure, responsibilities, and how those responsibilities are, sensitive to risk exposure. But the other one is also domain of economic activity. So, there are differences in across different gender categories in terms of economic activity. And so a question again here, can those activities, for example, be indexable for insurance? And then lastly, also in most setups, and we are increasingly seeing that there's a lot of, social organization, social networking that is happening, and that brings a lot of opportunities, both in terms of information sharing and in terms of learning, but as well as risk sharing. And so, having a gender-blind programming, is not going to work, and so we need to be intentional in our efforts to sort of combine asset building with asset protection, and especially in vulnerable contexts such as those women groups, by pairing them with mentors for periods of about 18 months, during which they acquire important business and life skills, continue doing their businesses. Hopefully the business has now picked up, but the BOMA project somehow withdraws. And so evaluation of that program after 4 years showed significant impacts here, both in terms of assets accumulation, but also in terms of cash income and as well as savings. But then one thing that then we want to ask ourselves is that, well, we see these impressive gains, but will they survive the next climatic shock? And so, as you can imagine, these shocks are covariate shocks, meaning that when they happen, and when you think about the magnitude, those assets that had been accumulated tend to, again, be depleted. So, but the question here is that although there's a strong case of coupling assets building with insurance, is that something that we can do, for example, with index insurance and in vulnerable setups such as pastoralist areas? And the first level problem here is that herding, which is the main economic activity in those areas, is based on an activity that is constructed or understood to be as a man activity. So will these, will rangelands therefore be relevant for women? And so, so we started by, first of all, just making people aware about insurance. So played a little game where people learned about how insurance works. They interacted in the app, in this game. We tested two approaches where we presented like the standard insurance in the standard conventional way, so in tropical livestock units. But also we introduced a novel approach here, which emphasized the risks that women face, and also allowed women to purchase insurance in what we call family units, but still, triggering only when, forage conditions fall below a certain threshold. And so uptake rates was super impressive in this game. So what we found was that when insurance was framed in ways that speak to the needs of the women, that uptake rates were significant. But what is also important to highlight here is that this was done in a context where there were subsidies, to help people experiment with the product. And you can see that even after the subsidies were phased out, the uptake rates were sustained, both in terms of take-ups, but also in terms of the actual amounts that people are paying for the policy. And so meaning, again, as I said, if insurance speaks to the needs of women, that uptake can be sustained. And so, but what else can we do? So there seems to be demand, but the shocks are there, and we've talked about the shocks being more intense, the frequency increasing. So what else can we do about this? And so one thing that we are currently testing is therefore embedding what we call VISA. VISA is Village Insurance Savings Account, embedding that within the graduation program. So the idea here is that women have already learned about saving. They already have mechanisms to hold each other accountable, and so they already know the importance of saving. But their businesses are still vulnerable to shocks. And so here we now, again, work with these women to help them learn about the insurance product, so we implement a curriculum, but they're also encouraged to accumulate small savings over time. And when the sales window for insurance opens, you address the liquidity constraint problems, and they can afford the product. So that's what we mean by the VISA project. And so it promises to relax both information constraint within the groups, as well as the liquidity constraints to purchasing the insurance. And so this basically shows you where we've been testing this already in 5 counties in the country, in Kenya, and we're already seeing significant contributions by women towards this VISA program. And so just to conclude, is that we see that ourselves and many parts of Africa are certainly places where insurance could make a big difference in terms of durably empowering women, and so therefore strengthening graduation programs. But we need to further assess the impacts of these interventions on, on empowerment, on assets accumulation, etc. And we hope that this approach can also then be something that can be taken up by other projects aiming to strengthen graduation programs. I'll stop here and happy to take any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelvin. Super, very nice, and good timing as well. That last slide had words like we could, we hope, we need. Is this one of these solutions, concrete, good practices that the organizers are looking for, where we say in terms of social protection, this is a practice, robust, or should I be just hoping?
So if I go back, so I showed already the impacts of the graduation program and also the early impacts from, for example, the embedment of the visa mode already shows some promising results in terms of the impacts that this could have in terms of sustaining the assets that have been built. So what we see, for example, is that without insurance, when a shock happens, the assets, tend to somehow get depleted, and women tend to then fall below even where they were. But what we find already from our evidence so far is that when there's insurance, in the presence of insurance, not only do those women bounce back, but they actually then, it puts them on this somehow trajectory, self-sustaining growth trajectory over an extended period of time. And so it shows that it not only brings people back, but also actually helps them to go to this sort of growth path that looks very promising.
So we're bouncing back and we're growing.
Exactly, because for me it's not just enough to bring people back to where they were. I think even more important is that people should be able to spring back and somehow be placed on that growth path.
Thanks, Kelvin. Yeah. Okay, we're going to shift the focus a little bit. We've had a framing, we've had a couple of case studies, we're going to have a small panel conversation, but I think we're going to make you work a little bit as well. So, thank you both. You may take your... We're back to the Menti again. I would like my panelists, could you maybe come up here very, very quietly and slowly? I would like you to talk to your neighbors. Talk to the person next to you, yeah? Maybe you don't know them. Just take 1 minute, 2 minutes. Social protection, safety nets, climate justice. Is there a big challenge that you think we face? Is there a big opportunity that you know of? Is there a good practice? So I'm going to take 2 minutes. You must talk to your neighbors, please. If you can turn around, talk to somebody, meet somebody new, take a minute, talk to your neighbors. It's just 2 minutes. I want you to think what you've heard and contribute to our conversation. Panelists, if you would like also to just get comfortable and get ready, have some water, make yourselves ready. It should be a little bit noisy in here. There's 3 ladies there, very quiet. People at the back are talking. Take a moment. Is there a big challenge you see? Is there an opportunity you want us to grasp? Is there a really good practice you know of? Just take a minute. Luckily, we have a spare minute. We're okay. Good. Have a walk. Yeah, yeah. Thanks. 25 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, I think. Anybody? Yes. Okay. If you feel like it, you can post it onto the Menti. Yeah. If you have an idea, you can see here the codes. If you can enter the codes, we're going to move on. I just wanted you to reflect, to internalize a little bit what you've been talking about. Yeah. Good. Okay, I'm going to move on while you're talking still. We're not going to look at the results. Not going to look at the results. Let me introduce the panelists. You should have had a chance if you want to add something to the Menti. But now the time talking is over, we need to come back to the listening. And I want to introduce my panel. We have 4 colleagues here, carefully chosen from all over the place to join us today. We have Jacqueline, who is from the State Department of Gender and Affirmative Action. Where is Jacqueline? Okay, she's over there. Yes, can you give a wave? Thank you. We have Stephen from Save the Children, UK, based in Kenya. He's a Senior Climate Resilient Livelihoods Advisor. I forgot to say that Jacqueline is the Director in the State Department. We have Hassan. You have to read down, lower down onto the screen. He's the Program Director from Concern Worldwide. Hassan, can you wave? Yeah. And we have Tahira, who's closest to me. She's a postdoctoral fellow at the Jamil Observatory for Food Security Early Action. And on the right-hand side, you can see another colleague, Todd, who is not on the screen. His job is to synthesize everything that we talk about. So you will see him in a few minutes. So we're going to do a panel, and we basically want to ask you to rather quickly react to some of the things we've been talking about. I'm going to start with Jacqueline, because the government has a major role in social protection. You're in the Department for Gender and Affirmative Action. Where do you see the opportunities or challenges for your ministry, your State Department, coming from climate change? And what does it mean for the social protection that you are providing or advocating and recommending?
Okay, thank you, moderator. And just to quickly pick up from where the last speakers left, I think social protection is very important for us to build resilience for not just women, but you know, men who are vulnerable to climate change, young people, children, people with disabilities. George mentioned about the fact that when we go to negotiations, we rarely mention about persons with disabilities. So even when we look at women, I think it makes sense to go deeper into who are these women, because not all women are at the same place when it comes to vulnerability to climate change, based on socioeconomic status or issues around disability. And also a colleague who was presenting just a few minutes ago was mentioning about ASAL areas. So you'll find that women in ASAL areas are even, face even more vulnerabilities as opposed to women in other areas that are not necessarily as vulnerable as those in those areas. So in terms of remedies, and maybe just to mention, from a government perspective, of course, there are a number of social safety net programs that are running. Like for those of you in the room who are Kenyans, know that when in drought-prone areas, there are social safety net programs to provide provisions in terms of food supplies, medical supplies in drought situations, but also like for the ministry that I work for, the State Department for Gender and Affirmative Action, we have semi-autonomous government agencies within our department, like the Women Economic Empowerment Fund, the National Government Affirmative Action Funds. So the Women Economic Empowerment Fund is kind of a soft loan that provides some resources to women to invest into economic ventures, and some of these, actually all of them, cushion them and kind of support their resilience to, among other things, impacts of climate change, but also just helping them in investing in green ventures. And since climate change is a reality, of course, across sectors, there's been an emphasis on when we are thinking of entrepreneurial ventures, we think green. So, and so just to reiterate the importance of these social safety nets that the government across ministries, when you go to them, the ministry responsible for issues around drought, there are those programs. If you come to the gender ministry, there are programs designed differently, but also to a large extent focusing on the same. In the agricultural sector, there are programs that are designed to build resilience of women and other vulnerable groups to be able to, to address the impacts of climate change, among other programs, of course, programs around climate smart agriculture in the agriculture sector, but also interestingly, you'll find some bits and pieces of climate smart agriculture within the gender ministry as a way of socioeconomic empowerment towards women and other vulnerable groups. So just in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, think green. What does green social protection look like? Is there a green social protection?
So in the course of providing, running the social protection programs, there is a push towards programs that are resilient to climate change. For instance, as we provide food, for example, in a drought situation, it makes sense to also build capacities of those communities that are affected in terms of investing in if they have some agricultural activities going on, providing them also with seeds that are resilient to climate change, so that beyond the immediate need now, there is also a futuristic vision of how these people or the communities will push on or sustainably go through the situation that they're grappling with at the moment, just as an example.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good example. So we're combining a bit those agricultural type things together with social protection, and that gives us that kind of greening in a sense. Thanks. Okay, we're going to move on. Steve, Save the Children, a humanitarian agency. We heard George, I think, say earlier, we're going to have to move away from all this humanitarian stuff in the face of climate change. What, you're working for children, with children, how do you see this? Are there some specific activities that you're doing in Save the Children with a view to adapting and supporting adaptation to climate change in a social protection framework?
Thank you, Peter. Yes, we know children, they contribute least to climate change. But when it comes to impact, they are the worst affected by climate change. And therefore, when we talk about climate change, we have to talk about children. I want to share some work that we do within Save the Children on climate change, social protection, and nutrition, because we have to link these three together so that we are able to achieve impact for children. And we call this approach life cycle approach to social protection. And within this approach, we try to target the two forms of malnutrition, child malnutrition. The first one is around wasting, where we talk about acute malnutrition, which is quite frequent when we talk about frequent climate extremes like droughts. And also, we use the same approach to address chronic malnutrition, which is more for standing. Again, quite common in terms of climate change. Now, we know if we take all the pledges under the Paris Agreement, we are talking about children who are born in 2020 will face 2.6 times more droughts than children who were born in 1960, meaning that the change is rapid and we need to work around that. Again, we know that if a child is born during a drought period, they are 41% more likely to be stranded. Again, standing, which is the worst form of malnutrition, which is being aggravated by climate change. We also know that we are talking about food production for children, and what is happening when we grow crops at an elevated concentration of carbon dioxide, soil carbon, from 450 ppm to 480 ppm, chances are that most of these crops will have lower densities of different nutritional values, whether it's vitamins or whether we are talking about minerals. There will be lower densities of that. And therefore, we have come within this sector under social protection to see how do we address some of these impacts of climate change on children. We do this by using the life cycle approach to social protection. And under this, we target children in their first 1,000 days, meaning that we target them from the time of conception up to the time they celebrate their second birthday. That's 1,000 days. We do this by targeting safety net transfers, cash transfers, predictable every month for that period. At the same time, we combine that with behavior change communication around the nutrition education, things like infant and young child feeding practices, things like exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months, and thereafter, we get them to ensure that children are getting diversified diet during that period. Now, I want to give you an example of this kind of work in northern Nigeria, where we were working in 2 states, in Jigawa State and Zamfara State in northern Nigeria. In this project, we targeted 100,000 women who were pregnant, and others were women with children under 2 years. Under this, we provided predictable cash transfers for 33 months at a rate of $20 per month. Apart from the cash transfer, we brought in these other plus interventions, including nutrition education, exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months, and also ensuring that after 6 months, they are able to give diversified diets based on the cash transfer that they are getting from the social protection scheme. We did an evaluation of this project, and the results showed that there was good reduction in stunting for children who are exposed to cash transfer plus these nutritional interventions. Again, we need to note that the stunting is very difficult to manage because it happens at a very early stage, and again, it has long-term impacts on child development, including how they undergo education and how they become, maybe in terms of their economic conditions in the future. The project...
Half a minute.
Yeah. We are undertaking a similar project in Malawi, and we are trying to encourage other governments to use these nutrition-sensitive social protection in their national schemes as a way of ensuring that we are able to improve or tackle child malnutrition within these projects as a way of adapting to climate change. But also we are conducting a randomized control trial in Malawi to ensure that we are able to inform evidence generation in this sector to demonstrate impact and effectiveness of this approach. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. It's really good to hear the very concrete examples. That's something that we were asked for the organizers to give us practices, examples, solutions that we can work with. We're running short of time, but I want to give you your moment. So, Tahira, if you can talk a little bit, we're looking at this, you're coming from a pastoral environment, you've been working in northern Kenya with drylands. There's many forms of social protection. How do you see this interface between social protection and climate change working out in those dryland areas, those rural communities? You share some insights.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you so much for joining us. We've had so many good case studies, and this all applies to what we are doing for the communities that we are trying to help, either pastoralist or agro-pastoralist. But for my case, I want to speak about what the communities are doing for themselves in terms of building safety net. So I'll talk about pastoralists in northern Kenya. Pastoralists thrive and enhance their resilience by productively utilizing 4 strategic resources, and these include land, labor, livestock, and water. Temporary and return it when they are out of recovery session. This kind of transfer enhances resilience, but also builds the capacity of that family to continue surviving despite the crisis that they face because of drought, flood, animal disease, or even conflict-related cases.
Tahira, we don't have time for all of them, if you can. Yeah? Yeah. Can you focus in on what will climate change bring for these traditional forms of protection, do you think?
Yeah, for example, this transfer, because they're trying to live with different forms of crisis, especially related to climate change, this transfer ensures that people have access to support, because sometimes the external support tend to come when it is too late. That means the communities need to live despite waiting for the external support. The existence of this social transfer is very essential to enhance everyday survival and continuity of livestock. So, the other one, the very important aspect of social protection that exists among the community is pooling resources together, whereby even those people who are vulnerable can contribute to accessing support because they pool labor together, as that is very important. Social protection is not just providing cash, but it also involves sharing labor. Labor is very essential. If you don't have flexible and accessible labor, you cannot move from one place to another. So it is a very important aspect of safety net that helps pastoralists survive. So pulling that labor together, even technology, like for example, motorbike, you hire motorbike jointly and help move the animals, even the sick animals, and access to very insecure places. That is number 2. And so number 3...
We don't have time, I'm sorry. I've just been told we have to be out of the room in 7 minutes.
Oh, Okay,
Yeah,
it's
so
fine.
is there a takeaway, a key point you want to share?
Yeah, okay, I'll end it here. Like, for the most important thing that we want to embed in social protection, aside from planning from above, we need to acknowledge these local practices, which is very essential, and it is the daily activities, and it can be embedded in this programming. I think I can end here.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry to have to cut you short there. Really a pity. Thank you. Hassan, take us away, please. We've been hearing about the rural areas. We've heard the children, the women, the urban environment. Same story for you. Tell us, you've been working in urban areas, I think in Kenya. Where do you see climate change influencing the social protection? And do you have some concrete solutions, good practices that we can hear from? Just in a few minutes, please.
No, thank you. Thank you, Peter, and thanks everyone. And being conscious also of the time. Building on George's comments, I think we have two evidence-based approaches that we've worked with here in Kenya and also in different parts of Africa as well as Asia around. And one of the things is we need to understand urban informal settlements first before understanding climate change and social protection in urban setting. Nairobi is quite reflective of most urban cities in Africa. And we have 60% of the population living in urban informal settlements, of which they live on only 10% of the land. This is often a neglected and forgotten group. And understanding social protection for this group in the wake of climate change, it's a group that is not affected traditionally the way we understand by livelihoods impacted and production systems. This is a group that is affected in terms of access to income, access to employment, access to food. And one of the key solutions that we've done is developing an indicator development surveillance for urban emergencies to really understand the characteristics and dynamics of this group. And also came up with an urban early warning early action, which formed the first, I think, Nairobi City County government was the first county government that had a directorate of food systems, which has really won, I think over the last 2-3 years, it's won 2 international awards on food systems. And it gives social protection in the urban setting a different angle, not the normal cash transfers as humanitarian assistance, but livelihood-based solutions. The second approach that we've taken is still evidence-based approach, which is flooding, I think, is the most impactful climate change hazard than any other hazard in the world. It affects more people than any other hazard, but it's also the least understood and studied. Under the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance, Concern and other partners, we came up with a tool known as flood resilience measurement at the community level. It's a community-driven tool, and it comes up and gives us climate-smart, risk-informed strategies at the community that can change the livelihood options to enable communities cope using their own normal, regular strategies. And it also taught us one thing, that whenever we do response, sometimes 2 neighboring communities affected by the same shock, having the same dynamics, do not require the same assistance. Unfortunately, that's what we normally end up doing. We harmonize an entire country or an entire region and respond to them the same way. But by using the FRMC, the flood resilience measurement at the community level tool, it enables us to pinpoint exact investment that is needed. One community might need a dike, another one a climate smart agriculture investment, another one might need climate proofing, the infrastructure, and we end up using the resources wisely. So these are the two that I will advocate as models of evidence-based approaches that can be scaled up and adopted, especially taking into account urban informal settlement groups.
Fantastic. Many, many thanks. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're just about to finish. I would like to thank the panel. We heard all about the flood resilience tool. We heard about those green approaches. I think, Steve, you talked about these bundling cash transfers with other tools. And Tahira, you talked about the community level mechanisms of social protection. So, thank you so much. Sorry the time was so tight. Can you give a round of applause, please, for the panelists? And I would like to invite my colleague Todd. Could you come up? So Todd has the enviable task, it's a very enviable task, of giving us a 1.5 minutes, key points, critical things you learned, things we can take away.
An enviable task indeed, but it is an enviable task because this has been a really great panel, a lot of very specific insights. I think the overarching theme is about accommodating diversity, that in climate change adaptation and mitigation programming, we need to not try and organize around technical measures that homogenize social difference. This was highlighted in a variety of different ways by various speakers. The phrase context specific came out a lot, which I think is very heartening because we need to acknowledge the benefits of social diversity. I think the challenge relating to that is every context is different, and which elements of context and which scenario and which location do you deal with and how. So context can be a bit of a fudge word sometimes, and I think as we operationalize these things, we need to get deep with what variables are we looking at when we talk about context. There was a lot about bringing together various services, what in some contexts is called bundling. I think Kelvin and Stephen both alluded to this, so multiple aspects, addressing multiple aspects to